Good afternoon to everyone that's here with us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar on the role of the next generation in transforming the philanthropic landscape. In collaboration with Innovest Advisory, this webinar will discuss the importance of engaging the next generation in philanthropy. More specifically, it will explore the characteristics and influence of the next generation, strategies to inspire the next generation, next generation philanthropy, and the role of outgoing philanthropists. As some of you may know, the Pearl Initiative is the region's leading non-profit business-led organisation to promote a corporate culture of accountability and transparency as a key driver of competitiveness. Launched in 2010 in cooperation with the United Nations Office of Partnerships, the Pearl Initiative aims to convene businesses, decision makers and future young leaders to take the lead in promoting and adopting greater standards in corporate governance. In light of the not so recent public health pandemic, our knowledge sharing events, including our seminars, workshops and roundtables, have moved to virtual webcasts, hence our webcast today. And you can find out more about our upcoming webinars on our website and on our YouTube channel. And we often record them and save them for on-demand viewing on our YouTube channel, so feel free to access previous webinars that we've held. Today's webinar is being held as part of our Governance in Philanthropy program, which was developed in 2017 to build standards and best practices for giving across the Gulf region. The scope of the program has grown year on year, and today we're focusing on demonstrating the value of engaging the next generational cohort and the importance of taking a forward-looking approach in order to optimize the impact of philanthropic giving. By way of inheritance, Millennials and Generation-Z will be recipients of the next great wealth transfer. While estimates vary on the exact amount, there is no disputing that these recipients of wealth will become the richest generation in history over the next decade. The vast majority of this amount will be invested into philanthropic organizations and endeavors, including family foundations, and will substantially impact generations to come. Incoming generational cohorts have shown to have strong characteristics that indicate a high interest in philanthropy and social impact, which will cause a considerable shift in the wider philanthropic landscape. However, many philanthropic wealth owners find that engaging the next generation is a challenging process. Today, we hope our speakers will unpack this topic further in today's session. I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Justin Sykes, Managing Director of Innovest Advisory, and Nisreen Metcalf-Zerekli, an Associate at Innovest Advisory. To give you a bit of background on Justin. Justin is a social investment specialist with 20 years of experience in supporting the deployment of private capital to create more and better jobs for vulnerable populations, often in fragile contexts. These investments have positively impacted hundreds of thousands of lives across a diverse range of countries across Africa and the Middle East. His wide-spanning career has included working for Youth Business International, the United Nations Youth Employment Network, and Silatech Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, Justin. Second facilitator for today is Nisreen. Nisreen started her career in the hedge fund industry at Tremont Capital Management and was responsible for researching and gathering information on an extensive range of global alternative funds to list on the TAS Hedge Funds database. Nisreen joined Fund Advisors UK Limited in May 2006 as an Associate Director and was instrumental in setting up a new hedge fund, executing market strategy and raising capital. Upon joining PwC in 2015, Nisreen established a service that provides advice to funds and companies on asset growth management. The focus was on firms whose impact was socially, environmentally and financially in line with the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. Thank you, Nisreen, for joining us today too. We really appreciate it. Just in terms of a bit of housekeeping, as with all our webinars, we do like to make them as engaging and interactive as possible. So we do encourage you to submit any questions you may have through the Q&A panel on the right of your screen. They will be addressed either throughout the session or Justin and Nisreen will dedicate the last 15 minutes of today's session to address your questions. So do make sure you take advantage of the wealth of knowledge and experience we have at our disposal today, and I hope you enjoy today's session. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Nisreen and Justine. Thank you both.
Thank you very much indeed, Yasmin, for your kind introduction and for the opportunity for us both to speak today on this subject of innovations in philanthropy, and particularly focusing on the role of the next generation in innovating philanthropy going forward. So we will split the session between ourselves, and I'll start. This is a broad overview of what we plan to get through in the session today. And without further ado, I think we'll introduce really the context in which these conversations are happening, our world today, some of the driving forces around growing aspirations of the next gen to support philanthropic endeavors, and particularly look at new models of philanthropy and what are the drivers behind that. So in terms of driving forces, we see 6 driving forces that are really changing the face of philanthropy globally, and particularly driven by the next gen. So I think broadly, this, what we've seen over the last 18 to 24 months is a sense of growing global consciousness around social inequality and the escalating climate crisis. And there's a sense, really, particularly amongst millennials, that there is a common duty to contribute to solutions. Key movements that have moved this mainstream opinion include Greta Thunberg, the Attenborough effect, the COVID-19, clearly, and the inequality that COVID-19 has uncovered, the Black Lives Matter movement, and then the Me Too movement. So all these things are driving growing consciousness. There's also a sense that there is a need to move beyond traditional models, traditional development aid, the money that goes from richer countries in the world to poorer countries in the world, and then private philanthropy is not enough to bridge what is a massive gap between the billions that are currently being used to finance global challenges around the world, and the trillions that actually will be needed to solve these huge problems like poverty and climate change and clean water and sanitation and education. So how do we get from this, how do we bridge this gap from billions to trillions? And we need new models and new ideas. And the private capital that is more intentionally focused on tackling some of these global challenges through investment-based approaches is critical to this. And I think there's been a huge amount of talk around ESG, environmental, social, and governance-based investing. Our feeling is that this type of investing, whilst really important, very much looks at managing risk rather than putting capital to bear to address really deep, intentional solutions to some of these world's problems. So this is this sort of beyond aid and beyond ESG agenda. A third point will be around transparency and technology, that a key driver of philanthropy and impact investment going forward is access to and use of technology, which is providing greater transparency, more real-time delivery of solutions, and that this uptake of technology and the accountability that technology brings is being really driven by the next gen. A fourth point would be around the transfer of wealth. Nasreen will go into this in more detail, but this largest ever intergenerational transfer of wealth is taking place right now. And it's the baby boomers who are moving on to a point in their life where they are wanting to achieve legacy. And then it's millennials who are amongst those beneficiaries, who are largely intent on being more conscious about how they live their lives and wanting to make a positive impact through their giving, but also through their investments and their lifestyle choices. And then the fifth would be this idea that it's the old days of perhaps giving as a gesture have moved on to now this situation now where there's really a need to determine impact. That impact measurement, how did my funding make a difference? In what way did it make a difference? How much was that difference? This idea of basically being able to measure impact is really critical, and we'll touch on this in a bit more detail later on. So I mentioned the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are really important when it comes to building, in effect, a framework or a blueprint in which giving and impact investing can happen in today's world. They provide this very, very useful set of framework and set of guidance through which we can look at how how capital that's deployed can make a real difference against these global challenges. Very practically, you've got these huge global problems. So 2 billion people lacking access to financial products and services, 1.2 billion people living in unsafe and crowded housing, 1.4 billion people without access to electricity, and so on and so forth. These are some of the huge global challenges that the world faces. And the opportunity is here around these SDGs is to say, well, that's the scale of the problem. How can we now bring capital to bear, whether it be philanthropic or whether it be repayable capital, that can be very, very carefully designed and focused on addressing some of these global challenges and really starting to move these numbers, these huge numbers downwards. And I think we'll talk later on in the presentation, but there is a growing sense that yes, philanthropy does and will continue to play a very key role in trying to address these global problems, but that impact investing, so investing in a way that has a commercial return, but also achieves a measurable social and environmental impact, is also going to be key to solving these problems. And I think that the idea really for us all to understand is that a lot of these problems, the solutions to these problems can also, as well as being addressed through philanthropy, can also be addressed through investment approaches. That, for example, let's take the 1.4 billion people without access to electricity globally. Looking at, for example, off-grid energy access solutions, so providing rural solar home systems, rather than expecting the government of any country to connect the grid to the last mile, that actually a private company can come in and provide solar home systems at a price point that's affordable for low-income populations to purchase. That, in effect, is an impact investment, which is a commercial opportunity for investors, but also is designed in a way that is pro-poor and is focused on addressing the SDGs as highlighted here. So I wanted to move on to this specific focus on how is philanthropy changing when it's viewed through the eyes of the next generation, and I'll pass the slides on to Nisreen now.
Thank you, Justin. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I wish I could be in Dubai right now, but you know, things are the way they are. I would have loved that. So I'm going to talk about key characteristics of next generation. So starting with wealth transfer. Intergenerational passing of wealth is the greatest ever and estimated at $30 trillion. Next generation want to be more involved in decision making and how families manage and allocate wealth. They want to make impact in different ways, and this will depend on how the opportunities are structured and now and in the future for them. Although they agree on the why and what of philanthropy, they might have their own diverge from previous generation on the how. Focus on solutions, not numbers, not products, not services. They take a human-centered approach to development challenges based on empathy with communities. They want to roll up their sleeves and help solve real problems alongside the organizations they support. They are eager to blur the boundaries and the difference between profit and charitable giving. They believe they can bring it all together and do even more good through what they do by either investing in socially responsible ways or supporting businesses that do. Accountability focused. It is more than just their names on the donor's wall that they're after. They want to see real and measurable results. They are hyper-focused on knowing where their funding goes and why. They want to change things significantly with respect to issues that they are passionate about. They need measurement and assessment of the success of their solutions, where they can also highlight areas to make improvement. It's more than money, it's passion about impact. Young donors will share their cause, they will volunteer for fundraising, crowdfunding, and they value interaction with other young donors. They prefer a dialogue to understand what can be done in the short and long term. and how best impact can be maximized. They have a collaborative mindset. They are willing to take more risks and have the energy and inclination to make a difference. They value interactions with their peer and meaningful conversations that are aligned with their interests. They are aware that key challenges such as climate crisis requires collective and sustained action. They are tech savvy. Young generation use technology in everything. I don't have to teach my daughter about how to cook or how to make art or how to solve tricky math problems. She looked it all up. I don't have to tell her who Greta Thunberg is. She already knows. She's highly influenced by her. She's very keen on recycling and not using plastic, and all by just using technology and looking it up. Dimension, she's 10. She's only 10. So the next generation is very accustomed to using technologies in everything they do. Technology is influencing philanthropic trend amongst next gen. 51% of millennials donate via technology platform and 43% via social media. Technology provides greater access for information, as Justin mentioned, greater visibility and quicker response time, which actually creates an opportunity for better connection and engagement with the next generation. How can we engage the next generation? This is a question that we hear a lot and has been discussed across the globe recently. The next generation are very passionate about making a difference and getting involved in issues that might not have been the main focus for previous generation. They are also more creative and innovative in the ways they see in solving these issues, which is why it's very important to engage them in philanthropy. Different areas where we can engage them. If we look at family structures, getting the young adults to be more involved in making a difference can be one of those meaningful new adventures. They become enthusiastic and knowledgeable as they become engaged in philanthropy, whether they are being engaged directly in becoming an active part of an existing family giving tradition, hoping to create a new one, or being helped to find their own path based on their own values. Stories will motivate them more than facts. Rather than statistics, they need to know how people are affected and how they can benefit from the work being done. Impact through innovation, another area. Use design thinking approaches, having meaningful conversation and engaging beneficiary communities to develop solutions. Each new generation brings something new to the table and valuable thinking and learning opportunities. They want to be hands-on and try more philanthropic innovations to increase impact. They are convinced there are better ways of solving social problems and addressing social needs than the traditional charitable methods. They're willing to try a new tool, support new organization to be able to innovate and get impact on the longer term. Learning by doing. There are challenges for charitable organization in attracting the next generation, as they are more interested in getting involved, as I mentioned, and being hands-on, which means there's a need for more transparency and finding ways to engage them in real problem solving. Drive accountability via data. Show them why it matters now. It takes years or a lifetime to achieve goals, but show where the money and time will go now and the difference it will make now by measuring impact and using tools to track results. For example, being able to assess data, as in 5 schools were being built, 5 children will get clean water. Using any tools or impact measurement assessment ways to find data, which I'm sure Justin will be talking about. To engage the next generation in smart ways, ask them to solve problems rather than asking them for donations. I think Justin, it's back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. Thank you. So after that sort of deep dive into some of the key characteristics of the next gen and ways that we have experienced work in engaging them, I wanted to come on and talk about the fact that perhaps the old model of you had your investments that were designed, to maximize commercial return, and then you had your philanthropy, which was designed to maximize your social return, and there was nothing in between. That those old models are rapidly changing, and that actually what you're finding now is that there is a whole spectrum of impact between those two poles. And in this space of in between comes these new concepts such as venture philanthropy and impact investment. And I wanted to just shine a light on these concepts in a little bit more detail. So I think this idea that there is a much more diverse approach in this age to achieving impact, and it's not just purely through donations, but through ways of using capital in different ways to achieve impact. So clearly, yes, the philanthropic donation model remains very important and critical for supporting some of these global problems. But I think within that, there is, as mentioned earlier, a growing focus on how do you select the most effective programs with the better value for money, and how do you deploy rigorous monitoring and evaluation systems that can really prove that the projects you funded had real impact. And that will be a subject actually next week of a 2-day workshop that we're doing with the Pearl Initiative around impact measurement. But also donations can be, or philanthropic money can be used in a catalytic manner. It can be used to basically underwrite or de-risk private investment. And we're seeing this increasingly in many different projects around the world, where perhaps commercial investors, their heart is telling them that they would love to support a social enterprise or a business in a fragile post-conflict country, but their head, the accountant in their head, is saying, no, this is far too risky. Increasingly, what we're seeing is blended finance models, where philanthropic funding can be used to de-risk the private investors, who then the risk and return profile of an investment is changed because they are underwrote or protected by philanthropic funding. And this is suddenly bringing, when we talk about the billions to trillions needed to finance the Sustainable Development Goals, these types of models are exactly the way that private capital can be brought into markets where they'd never previously gone. This idea of mission-aligned investing, this is really interesting, and some work that we've done multiple times now with partners. That a charitable organization, say a charity or a foundation or a charitable trust, although it is a not-for-profit structure, it is not prevented in its statutes to invest, as long as the investments it makes, the profit that generates off those investments, are recycled and reinvested back into the charitable mission or philanthropic mission of the organization. This is really interesting because it does allow organizations, perhaps who have endowments, to use a much greater pool of their capital to align with their philanthropic mission. And it allows this idea of an evergreen approach that you can structure and manage investments so that they grow the assets of the charitable venture and increase their impact on society. So for example, a charity might be focused on financial inclusion in the Middle East. And rather than just providing grant funding, the foundation could provide debt or equity investments into microfinance institutions in the Middle East, which on one hand generate a return for the foundation, but on the other hand increase the impact in terms of lives changed. And all profit would again be recycled back into the foundation's operating budget to increase sustainability and ultimately overall impact over time. The venture philanthropy model, I think, is a really interesting one with growing support. So the idea here is a social investor. So again, it could be an individual, a family, a foundation, or a trust, or a family office. The funder commits to provide grant funding, so it's clear that there is no expectation of return, but it's grant funding into a business venture, and that's fully aware by all parties that it's a business venture. And this could be financial support to the business, or it could be non-financial support in terms of training and capacity building. That business venture, however, has a very specific stated social mission. So it could be a social enterprise, it could be a social purpose business, or it could be a not-for-profit that has a products and services model. So for example, it could be the social enterprise that runs clean water and sanitation projects in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where water is provided at $1 a day for communities, and those communities can afford that. So it is a commercially viable model, but with a social purpose. And ultimately, the final beneficiaries I mentioned are vulnerable populations, such as minorities, people with disabilities, who are receiving life-changing products and services, such as microfinance or clean water and sanitation, or energy, or affordable housing. And for the original investor, they are not getting they've committed not to get a financial return, but they are getting a very clear impact return. And that sort of moves on to the broader subject of impact investing. So impact investing started probably now about 10-15 years ago as a very niche investment thematic. The latest data from the Global Impact Investment Network, which is the industry body for impact investing, just out this month, highlighted the asset theme is now the assets under management for the theme are approximately 700 billion around the world. So it's gone from being a niche market area now to increasingly mainstream. The key hallmarks of an impact investment are these 4 issues or 4 points. One is this concept of intentionality. So unlike environmental, social, and governance-based investing, which seeks basically to invest in companies in a way that screens out negative risk, environmental and social negative risk. Unlike that, impact investing seeks to intentionally identify and invest in businesses that at the core of their business models, on one hand, are commercially viable and can generate commercial returns for investors, but on the other hand, are solving a very clear social and environmental problem. So for example, the clean water and sanitation business, or the off-grid energy business, or the social housing business. A second hallmark is that they basically, in the investment process, they are basically integrating evidence that this investment will change lives, or this investment will improve the planet. So that has to be baked into the investment process, and that data on how you will measure your social change over time. What is the social impact of this investment? What is the environmental impact of this investment? That you commit to measure that and report it transparently to the market, not just investors, but to broader stakeholders. And that's basically this active impact management. And then you contribute back to the growth of the industry, which, as I mentioned, is growing particularly fast at the moment. There are diverse strategies to impact investing, and these are 4 different strategies that we have been involved in with a number of our clients and partners we work with. One is this idea of a portfolio. So for example, if a family has an existing investment portfolio, and that could be managed by themselves, it could be managed by a family office or by a trust or investment advisor, it is basically agreeing that a certain percentage, let's say a 5% or 10% of the overall investment portfolio, is carved out to achieve agreed environmental and social impact as well as investment returns. And these may vary based on risk and return and liquidity and according to investor geographic and regional focus. But this idea of saying, this is my total wealth and I'd like to carve out 5% or 10% to really invest in projects that meet my aspirations to invest for good. Then there's this idea of a seed investor approach, and this is typically where an investor is very passionate about a certain issue, and they want to use their investment as a catalytic seed capital to bring a new venture to market. So it could be a fund, or it could be a bond, a green bond, or a green sukuk, or something like this. And their whole focus is saying, we will seed the capital, but our objective is to have a much greater impact by attracting other investors, third-party investors or donors into this project. So, for example, we are working with a client who's focused on a fund that will support female-owned businesses in Southern Africa, and they are supporting the startup and initial financing of the project. But now they're going to market to identify third-party investors who will support that concept and bring the overall project to market. We're working with a number of business families who have achieved their wealth through running successful businesses and being successful entrepreneurs, and they really want to see their strategy for giving back to society not through the lens of purely donation, but through the lens of actually, can we use business principles to achieve social impact? So this is really the idea of setting up social enterprises, and that therefore they bring their business acumen and their business network to a project which is run as a business, but not necessarily making a profit for shareholders. That profit is reinvested back into the social mission. Microfinance is a really good example of this, and I'll talk to one of our case studies where we've done this with a Dubai-based family around microfinance. And then the fourth example is really where, you know, it's working with a family who have very specific aspirations, and you know there is nothing in the market that they can invest into that meets these aspirations. And in this case, it's creating a special purpose investment vehicle that would support their very specific needs. And I'll provide an example of our work with a family of Syrian origin who are doing some work around financing refugee entrepreneurs in the Levant region, as an example of this. Nisreen, I'll pass back to you to this concept of, I think millennials and the next gen very much see their impact not just as philanthropy and not just as investment, but actually there needs to be broader alignment with family values that cross other areas as well. So it's more of a holistic approach.
Thank you, Justin. So aligning impact with family values, it's important, as Justin mentioned, it's important to assess where our generation is in terms of value alignment with their business and lifestyle. Choices made about what kind of family business to build, what kind of future to wish, may be different in how the next generation would make choices. For them, it's a choice of a role in relation to the family and its business and how it will affect others, which make next generation issues very important. There are 4 different areas, as you can see in the chart, to look at, so to build an impact framework around your values. Although they are different, they are linked. It's about balancing them and looking at the impact in a holistic approach through all these things. So looking at your business, it's how you create value. It's your primary focus in life, where you create value in what you contribute to the world and what you do for a living. So how do you assess what impact your business make? For example, impact on the environment and climate change. Contribution to society and community, how well you treat your employees. What are you doing about reducing waste? And what can you change? Do you have an ESG policy in place? Do you have objectives and a purpose and a work culture that reflects your value? Looking at lifestyle, it's your living life, enabling your family's lifestyle and providing comfortable life from home to education, leisure and travel. How do you assess impact in your lifestyle? You look at your waste production, recycling, carbon emission, single-use item, packaging, what clothes you wear, how is your food sourced, are you a conscious consumer, and what can you change? Can you reduce, reuse, recycle, buy quality, not quantity, use solar power, for example, use electric cars, perhaps offset your carbon emission? Looking at investments, this is where your capital is accumulated over time, intended to live long-term, security of lifestyle. Are you focused on wealth preservation or accumulation? How do you assess? What are your values around investing? Where is your money actually invested? Are the companies you manage conscious, and do they have ESG impact? Are the businesses you are invested in ethical, responsible towards society and the environment? What can you change? Perhaps at minimum, invest in ESG funds that have good rating, but be careful of greenwashing. Consider your views on ethical investing, or perhaps take it a step further and allocate capital to alternative investments like impact funds, which will allow you to make choices more aligned with your values with regards to what themes and geographies you might want to invest in, or perhaps looking at just in different strategies for impact investing and how you can do that in your investments. Looking at legacy. How do you want to be remembered by family and society? What is your passion? And what is the lasting impact you want to make? How do you assess that? Assess your capital allocation, your daily contribution to society, your ethical and religious belief, cultural beliefs. Determine what you can afford and give and invest in charity, philanthropy, and impact. What changes you can make. Perhaps have a structured plan around family legacy and philanthropy that aligns with your family value across all generations. Consider allocation to alternative investment, or look at the impact space and strategies we've mentioned. Next generation will be thinking if their work is aligned with their values and if they are making a difference. This will affect their future employment and lifestyle decisions. I think that's back to you now, Justin.
Thank you, Nasreen. So I just wanted to also touch on the issue of governance as well. And I think two areas here. One is around due diligence and the other is around impact measurement. So earlier in the conversation, we talked about the next generation being really hyper-focused on results and quality of their funding. Is this funding having a real impact? Is it changing lives? Is it improving the planet? How do we select the best organizations who offer the best value for money? And how do we track their performance over time and gather data in a way that is meaningful and can tell us that this change is actually happening? So I think on the first aspect of this is having a high quality due diligence process in place that really once a philanthropist or an impact investor has determined what their aspirations are. You know, they may say, I want to focus on sustainable housing in North Africa. And I want to invest in building companies that build sustainable housing. Once you've done that, then it's really a process of assessing and screening options out there. So understanding the landscape, what companies exist out there, what is their reputation, who has invested in them, what is their financial performance, what is their impact performance, understanding the context in which those businesses operate, and likewise for purely philanthropic and charitable endeavors as well. So this idea of having a very strong due diligence process as set out in this chart that really looks at integrity and background checks, documentation, policies and procedures, who are the owners, who is on the board and the governance, what are they doing legal due diligence, doing commercial due diligence if it's an investment, doing financial performance analysis if it's an investment as well, and really being able to carry out this process in a robust way that generates reports and recommendations that then can be used by the investor or the philanthropist or their advisors to make decisions on ultimately deploying funding into these projects. So that's really that sort of upfront due diligence process, and the better and the stronger and the more robust this is, the less likelihood that there is potential for misuse of funding or inefficient use of funding that can occur. And then the second point is around this whole area of impact measurement. And why should we measure impact? I think this has been touched on in some detail earlier in the presentation, but it really allows an alignment between the funders' values and their funding objectives. It allows the ability to actually understand whether the aspiration to achieve positive impact on people and planet is actually happening. And it also provides a design support tool that actually enables the funder to refine and enhance, because you learn what works and what doesn't work, what perhaps didn't go to plan, maybe what happened that you didn't expect to happen, both positive and negative. And it provides accountability to all parties, both the funder and the recipient of funding. So now I wanted to kind of move on to some very sort of practical examples of our work, which I think hopefully will resonate with the participants and give food to thought. And as such, we specifically focused on the Middle East and North Africa region. So these are practical examples of where we've worked with clients to develop both philanthropic and impact investment solutions. So the first one is working with an ultra high net worth family office. And the client had an aspiration to create a bespoke investment strategy that would basically invest in livelihoods for Syrian refugees and host nationals in the countries that those refugees are in: Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, for example. The idea basically was to support the creation of such an endeavor, and that involved from our side research and analysis of the ecosystem and the environment across the Levant region, sourcing and screening and due diligence of refugee inclusive investment opportunities, whether they be funds or whether they be businesses that are owned and operated by refugees, or hiring refugees, an identification of strategic partners, potential co-investors, and viable projects. And the outcome of that project was, in effect, the design of a social venture capital platform for investing into refugee-owned and operated small and medium-sized businesses in Turkey, that created the opportunity for the family office to invest into the project. And fascinating experience, because some of these businesses were set up by refugees who'd left Syria during the conflict and pretty much lost all their working capital and all their assets, and re-established operations. But because they were refugees dislocated from their home in a new country, they didn't have the social networks or the proof of assets or business experience that would allow them to access refinancing from, say, a Turkish bank or equity providers. So this vehicle, in effect, provided that framework in which a family office, in effect, could that was aligned on supporting refugee livelihoods and refugee businesses, could support the re-establishment and growth of these businesses. And some of them in the east of Turkey now employ thousands of workers, both refugees and Turkish host nationals, so contributing to job creation and livelihoods in the region. Second example will be working with a private foundation in the Gulf region, and that objective was to support large-scale job creation across the Middle East and North Africa region via an impact investment strategy, with the idea that first and foremost, any investment that was screened had to create jobs at scale, and secondly, if it could be invested in a way that preserved the capital of the foundation, ideally protected against inflation and ideally with a modest upside, then all profit would be reinvested back into the mission of the foundation. And it meant that year on year, more and more money could be deployed to support job creation across the region. That model became very interesting, this idea of a mission-aligned investment strategy for a foundation, because once the foundation was able to demonstrate that it could invest in the region in a way that generated a return and generated significant jobs, for example, through investment in microfinance institutions, other parties joined. So a number of other foundations and ultra high net worths joined the foundation in a collective or a pooled investment scheme that made over 35 investments in 12 Middle Eastern countries, totaling more than $50 million deployed and creating 200,000 jobs. So this is just an example of what can be achieved with the right strategy and the right resources. A third example, I'd mentioned it earlier, is working with a consortium of diaspora, African diaspora based in Dubai, and they are expatriate businessmen to support basically the creation of a livelihood strategy for the Horn of Africa through a microfinance-based model. So this sort of speaks to this entrepreneurial-driven model. So successful business people based in Dubai then created a privately owned regional microfinance holding company, a not-for-profit microfinance company. Not-for-profit does not mean not commercial. It just means that all profits are reinvested back into the business. That was set up in 2014. We've been providing support to basically the design of that, the management of that, the ongoing success of that business in terms of products and services and human resources and investor relations. That business has now deployed $20 million of financing to support more than 20,000 low-income micro and small businesses start and grow. We estimate it's created 10,000 jobs, and through this period, it's mobilized $6 million in third-party financing, including Sharia-compliant investment from third-party investors. And then a final example is our work with a client of ours that's engaged in this project called the Syria Recovery Trust Fund. And this is focused on areas of the country in Syria outside of regime control that have suffered significantly from the conflict. And this program is focused on supporting educational recovery by clearing of rubble from schools that were used by fighters in the past as barracks. So they have rubble, they have unexploded ordnance. So clearing these, making them safe, and then reintroducing educational equipment, schools, desks and chairs and books, and then basically allowing these schools to reopen. And this is a philanthropic project that has been backed by some bilateral donors, sort of EU donors, but is also being supported by a number of philanthropic organizations from the Middle East. And they're now expanding this program into street lighting, for example, return of sewage systems, as well as the education focus. And I think the really important story here is not only recovering critical infrastructure to enable children to go back to school, but through this reconstruction project is creating significant amount of employment for local populations in the actual rubble clearance and reconstruction. So it's a very significant job creation opportunity here. And sorry, one more example, which would be our work with a client called Better Shelter, who have a leading humanitarian shelter solution that, tents, canvas tents are, for many reasons, impersonal and not particularly humane. They don't give privacy, they don't give security and safety. They've created a hard shelter solution in partnership with UNHCR and IKEA Foundation. 40,000 of these shelters have been sold to UNHCR over the last 7 years, and they are now being increasingly used in the Syria crisis on the border and in areas not controlled by their regimes to provide refugee shelter, but also to provide very interestingly, in the current context, medical facilities for testing for COVID and for self-isolation for COVID. And again, this has been supported by some significant philanthropic support from the region. So, for example, Atta Relief Foundation had provided 182 shelters in the Jarablus area of the Syrian-Turkish border. And again, this has strong opportunity for additional support. So I think that's, in summary, that's the overview today. I think just a couple of slides to end up on who we are as Innovest. I talked about that spectrum of capital. That, you know, the old days was about sort of traditional investments that maximize commercial return on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, philanthropy, where you maximized your impact, your social or environmental return only, and that there is this continuum now, a spectrum where you can invest, you can do ESG investment, you can do sustainable investment, you can do impact investment. And we very much as Innovest Advisory serve as advisors in the sort of the right-hand side of the quadrant, this area around thematic, around impact investing and very sort of intentional philanthropy, as you've seen from some of the examples. You know, our areas of support in this space to private clients focus on these three areas. So impact advisory, so helping clients, so family offices, foundations, ultra high net worth individuals, trusts, charitable trusts, etc., charities in some cases, help design impact solutions. So the strategy, the structuring, research and analysis to help build a strategy of how to deploy capital in a deeply meaningful and intentional way, whether it be philanthropy or impact investing. Then this whole point about impact design. How do we know that we can design an intervention with the best chance of success and have the right systems in place that we know what social environmental impact we're tracking? What are our KPIs? What are our metrics? And then the third piece is, okay, great, we've got a really robust system and we know what success looks like in 5 years' time, and we know how we're going to track it. But how then are we actually going to do the monitoring? So how do we measure impact? How do we have a management system in place that gathers the data, analyzes the data, and reports those impact outcomes back to investors? And we have a system that does this, and we're being backed by we're part of a Google startup cohort, a Google Sustainable Development Goals startup where they're helping us basically build and enhance our impact measurement system for clients. How is that practically done for clients? There is a 6-step process that we go through that starts with discovery, so the drivers and the rationales for families' aspirations around achieving impact. We really sit down and listen and spend a lot of time listening, and then on the basis of listening, we then put a strategy together that really brings the family's aspirations and their values to the heart of a giving strategy, a philanthropic strategy, or an investment strategy. And then we build the impact measurement framework. So how are we going to measure impact? What does success look like? Then go out and research. And that's really when the family says, look, our priority is women's economic empowerment in Morocco, for example. We can then go out and we can identify high quality charitable ventures, high quality impact investments, and provide that research and reporting to say, this is the landscape. And from our understanding, this is the best opportunity you would have to have a really meaningful change with your funding. Then basically go into helping implement these projects by doing that screening and due diligence, and then ultimately once the project's been selected, provide project management support, and then finally this impact measurement and reporting and feedback loop, so that the client says, well, yes, we didn't have as much impact as we thought we'd have. Perhaps we need to reposition our portfolio to have more impact where we've learned that we're having greater impact in one area than other. So that's the sort of process that we go through. And then finally, I think this quote from Nelson Mandela sort of sums up a lot of our work. You've seen from some of our examples, we're working in fragile countries such as Somalia in the Horn of Africa. We're doing work in Syria. So it might seem that some of this work is impossible, and how can you bring philanthropy and impact investment provided by private wealth into addressing some of these problems? It seems impossible that this money can be deployed in a way that makes a real difference, and even in some cases can come back. Well, it can be. We can prove that we've proven that it does, and that's a sense that this is the impossible can be done. So I'll leave it there. And I think we have, sort of five minutes or so to answer questions. I see on the chat the questions. We have 3 questions at the moment. So I'm just going to have a look at those. First one's very simple. We'll be sharing the presentation with attendees. Absolutely. That's Batul. Absolutely. It's recorded, and I believe our colleagues at the Pearl Initiative would be, putting it online with a link from social media and on their website. The second question: have you set up any social enterprise interventions that address the needs for inclusion? Absolutely. So I think the example I gave of our work in the Horn of Africa speaks to that, in effect, it was a microfinance institution that was set up by a consortium of Dubai-based business leaders, and it's structured as a social enterprise. So it is not providing financial services, Sharia compliant financial services in the Horn of Africa, where it charges for those services based on Murabaha and Ijara financing principles, and therefore it generates a commercial return, but it is not then distributing that commercial return to shareholders. It's reinvesting all of the profit back into the social mission so that it can have greater impact. So that's an example. We're working with a fintech, a financial technology business that's supporting dairy farmers in Kenya. We're working with a organic fruit producer in Sierra Leone, which is mango juice and pineapple juice, and that's structured as a social enterprise where they have over 3,500 smallholder farmers who are growing mango and passion fruit and coconut. And because it's being sold on international markets as fair trade and organic, the premium is being passed down to the farmers, who are then using that premium to pay for education, the increased income they get and increased wages. They're using it to pay for education and health, etc. So we have many examples of where we've helped set up these types of social enterprises. Next question. What would your recommendation be for an individual philanthropist to get started on their impact evaluation journey? Kavita, so I think our recommendation is really this sort of process of self-reflection, to really sit down and ask yourself what change you want to see in your world, in this world, and have a sense of what you can do, how much resources you have available, what your network is, what time you might have available, because it's not just about money. Have a look at your assets, financial assets, social assets, business assets, and how perhaps these assets could be brought to bear on an issue that you have deep passion about and want to somehow make a difference. And I think it all starts from there. And I think once you've done that sort of evaluation, that self-analysis process, it then would lead you to a strategy, and however small that strategy is, it then would allow you to deploy. And that could be, it could be starting with $5 on kiva.org, which is a crowdfunding platform where you can support vulnerable populations through microfinance. You can start with $5. That's all it takes. So you could be as modest or as ambitious as you want. And obviously for larger structures such as family offices and foundations and charitable trusts, we very much are engaged in those conversations, those early conversations around aspirations and translating aspirations into strategies. A fourth question, I think here, have you done things the other way around, starting with mission, non-profits that need to generate capital and seek investors rather than starting with investors? Absolutely, yeah. So one of our core areas of our work is working with what we call impact SMEs, so small and medium businesses that have social and environmental goals at their heart. They've basically been set up by the founders to address a a clear social environmental challenge. And we are working with them because we believe that they're a brilliant business. They are commercially viable or on a pathway to commerciality, and they are at their core, they're solving an environmental and social problem. And we work with them to help them understand their impact, measure their impact, and then communicate that impact to the market. So a number of businesses we're working with that are doing hugely impactful work. So in the off-grid solar space, we're working with an off-grid solar company in Kenya, for example. There are a number of businesses we're working with and helping them on that journey. I think we have a last question here because I think we're on time. Please, can you please touch on the challenges of when involving the next gen? Yeah, I think one of the challenges, perhaps Nasreen, maybe pass this one to you if you have any thoughts on some of the challenges involving the next gen. I think we have 1 minute, Nasreen, before we have to close.
Sorry, I didn't realize I'm muted. Yes, so basically, I think we need to kind of think more of one of the challenges is that all the strategies of previous generation has been the same for a while, and I think we need to kind of stop and step back and rethink what new approaches we can think about to involve the next generation, what they're interested in, what they're passionate about. As we mentioned before, technology is a big part of their lives, so how can they not just influence but also be influenced, and how can we include them to feel that they are involved and making a difference? So the challenges are maybe that some organizations need to think about that to make them excited and involve them. Yes, perhaps kind of being more innovative and getting more involved with other communities and their peers. I think I'm just worried about time, so I think, yeah.
Thanks, Nasreen. Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think actually these venture philanthropy and impact investing are actually a very useful way of engaging the next generation, because it aligns values and worldviews with, for example, a family's long-term objectives to manage their wealth for future generations. So I think we see this, and we work with a number of clients where it's the next gen who we've helped build a venture philanthropy or impact investment portfolio, and they've been hugely engaged in this, very passionate and personally involved in the design, the research, and even being involved, like sitting on the board of some of the companies that have been invested in. So very, very engaging. We will leave it there, though. That I think we're a couple of minutes past, so we're on time. Thank you so much to Yasmin and the team at the Pearl Initiative for giving us this opportunity to speak. And we'd be happy to engage with anybody on this call afterwards through direct emails or follow-ups. I hope you found it useful. And just to mention, there will be a 2 days over 2 half days next week where we'll be running a workshop, which is a technical workshop, which is a deep dive on how do you measure impact. So would be delighted to welcome you to join that as well. Thank you very much. Thanks, Yasmin.
Thank you.